Hey, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're in viewing this. Welcome to Live with Dan. Today we have a very special episode around AI and two very good, not only practitioners, but also thought leaders in the space as well. So we'll get to them. First, I want to talk about X Day. So we have Question Pro X Day coming up here in October, and that will be October 26th. So if you're not registered or you want to know more about it, we'll put a link in the comments, but we'd love to have you. It's a day filled with speakers and workshops to learn not only more about Question Pro, but just develop your personal growth as well in the inside space. So we would love to have you and host you here for that. There's the link is there in the comments, on whatever platform you're viewing this on. If you use code Dan-guest, you'll get complimentary registration. So feel free to make use of that. If you have any questions on it, reach out to anybody at Question Pro. We're all rallying behind this effort. All right. So I want to bring in Sumair, who is a part of Question Pro. He leads our global AI programs and partnerships. And then we also have David Iudica, who's an SVP of Research and Insights, Retail and Wealth at Citi. So excited to bring these guys in and have a wide-ranging conversation about AI. Sumair and David, welcome.
Thanks, Dan. Great to be here.
Awesome. So we want to talk about AI, of course, and everything that's going on. And one thing that I always kind of say that's interesting to me is it feels like ChatGPT, generative AI, has been around forever, but largely it's been adopted in the past 7 to 8 months. So it's amazing this adoption curve that we're seeing. So David, I'd love to ask you, how do you see organizations and insights leaders looking at the explosion of AI-powered tools and research? How are you guys looking at it there at Citi, and what have you noticed in the market?
Yeah, good to see you, Dan, and thanks for the invitation. Happy to be here. So yeah, I think in terms of the explosion of AI, it's been the most rapidly adopted technology. I think it was up until a Threads that came out, and then that was the most rapidly adopted.
Yeah.
But ultimately, yeah, it's been all over the news. I think there's no conversation you can have without it. So it's really kind of infiltrated into all of the conversations that we have across all of the different parts of our business. And so I think from our perspective, from a market research perspective, really thinking about it more within our industry, there's tangible effects and impacts that you've already felt. And then there's kind of these uncertainties as to like where it's going to go next. And I think the generative nature of it in and of itself makes it seem like there's this open-ended question as to like where it could go next. And so I think that these conversations are super important because from my perspective, AI is an assistant to all of us. And that's the way that we should really view as a tool and as an assistance. And then it's also up to all of us to innovate, responsibly in the space and innovate in a way that's going to kind of generate more opportunity for all of us in the long haul. So it's kind of a broad-based answer, but I think ultimately it's a very broad-based kind of approach, and where it's going is so broad that you really have to take more of a sort of broader view into what the impact or the potential impacts of it could be.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, and it is broad, and I think it'll be interesting just to see what avenues get adopted the quickest. I think it's really interesting. Sumair, what do you think around that? Like, what have you seen in the space? A little bit different lens from developing software around AI, and obviously you're keen on a lot of the things going on in generative AI as well. What are your thoughts around that, and how insights leaders are looking at the explosion of AI?
Thanks, Dan. And I think David has made a great point, especially about the fact that it's the next shiny thing right now, right? That everybody wants to have it, even though people who don't really get it. A lot of people don't get it, but they want to have it, right? And they're trying to figure out ways to join the conversation. And I think which is good, and it has happened before. It has happened with so many different kinds of innovations that have come through a lifetime. But at the same time, I think what we also need, which is what we are trying to do together with David and a few of the people that I'm going to talk about, is to really rethink this a little bit from an insights perspective, right? What are the goals that we are trying to achieve? What are the problems that we want to solve? who are we trying to solve it for, and what are the ways in which we can do it, right? So
Hmm.
there are some fundamental questions that I think we need to ask ourselves as we are seeing this explosion. And it's very easy to get carried away with
Hmm.
all this noise and say, hey, you know what, just do it, just do whatever it
That's
is,
true.
right?
Yeah, good point.
And so I think as insights leaders, we kind of do a little bit of that rethink. And when I say rethink, when I say these things, you can always tell which book I'm reading these days. So I'm reading Think Again by Adam Grant, and
Hmm.
basically that's what he's propagating. That you got to get back on the table and ask some fundamental questions, and I think we need to do that.
Got it. No, makes sense. And that Adam Grant, Think Again, I have that on my bookshelf here. I need to read that. That's a good one. And I think you're right. It's interesting you mentioned this, like people are like, oh, I got to use it. And there's all these ideas around it, but ideas are nothing without execution, right? So I think it's interesting in that regard, but then also, maybe it's like practically, David, how can AI help insights leaders in space? And what are you seeing that is like kind of practical application of it?
Yeah, I think there's quite a bit that it can do already, and then
Hmm.
quite a bit that sort of we can work on kind of innovating moving forward.
Yeah.
If when it comes to sort of NLP and unstructured data and the approach to unstructured data, there's a pretty huge white space there. Just in thinking of how to query data, how to be able
Hmm.
to build advanced analytics in a more consultative fashion where it becomes more real time. You can sort of extrapolate that out into different methodologies and different things that suddenly it opens up these different avenues for you as a researcher where you've got quantitative for quantitative, qualitative for qualitative. You perhaps can build quantitative sample through qualitative research
Hmm.
through unstructured data, right? And then be more confident in building an NLP model that is, really reflective of, uh, what you're really seeking to sort of get from it, and then build insights more quickly. Then it sort of frees the time of all of us to be
Hmm.
able to ask the right questions, to query the right queries, and really um, learn how to ask questions in the right way to get the right answers. And I think that's going to be a huge kind of shift to a certain degree in terms of how like we really start approaching this. But I think, to that end, perhaps what you start seeing in the future is a change in methods, right? Like there's just a
Hmm.
methodological shift in terms of an approach,
Right.
which is probably good timing, right? Like, when we do lots of quantitative surveys, the surveys become long. You're trying to make the survey maybe stand on its head a little bit and do things that maybe it shouldn't do.
Hmm.
Well, perhaps like an open conversation with somebody, with several people, in a format like texting or whatever,
Hmm.
becomes much more organic, and now you're monitoring that conversation. So I think to me, that's kind of already happening to a certain degree, where there's a lot
Okay.
of it being sort of applied towards NLP, but then where that could go and kind of how we could build more within the industry, and kind of expand the methods and approaches that we currently take with more confidence, I would say,
Hmm.
is really crucial.
Got it. No, that makes sense. I no, I 100% agree with you. And Samir, obviously, we're building tools to help people like David out. So, what do you see in terms of ways that AI can help, David be more effective, efficient at his job, and ways that AI is helping out insights leaders?
Right. So I think for me, the Nielsen CEO where I used to work, right? So Nielsen CEO, actually, Steve Hasker
Hmm.
used to say that our goal is to help our customers understand their customers better than they do, right?
Hmm.
So create solutions, create methods, create tools that allow that level of in-depth understanding. Now,
Right.
if you take just that principle and expand it, and say, okay, with now, where can AI inject, right,
Hmm.
into answering this question or towards that goal? I think that's really where we are going, right, at Question Pro. So we are kind of asking that question: that how do we help organizations get to that level of understanding? Now, the interesting thing is that there's obviously increased complexity now and increased expectations and demands from insights, because it's not just about understanding your customers, understanding them better and faster, and more cost effectively, to be honest,
Hmm. Hmm.
than the next guy, right? Than your
Right.
competitors. And and now there's also this tendency towards, okay, you know what, customers are also humans. So
Yep.
it's not always as simple to just simply follow the ways that things have been done. So I was talking to a colleague of mine at one of the largest retail companies in the US, grocery retailers, and they do a lot of these concept tests, right? When they're launching a new product, or they want to
Hmm.
introduce new categories, or they want to create shelves in a certain way. And so they do these concept tests, and they say a lot of time what we are seeing is that there is a gap between what people say and what people do, right?
Hmm.
And I think that's another big challenge that AI solutions can help bridge, right? So how do we
Hmm.
improve the listening post? How do we expand the listening and observation post so that we can bridge that gap? And I think QP is, and that's where we are working on Question Pro. Some of the products
Hmm.
and AI solutions that we are working on
Yeah.
is kind of multifaceted, that it's going to allow that sort of gaps to be filled in a
Hmm.
smarter way, and I must say in a responsible way as well. I have to add that.
Yeah. That's true. In a responsible way. Yeah. There's always that aspect too. What, you know, Samir, what kind of throw it back to you here? I mean, all this is great, right? We love all of this, but what are some pitfalls or risks or things that, people should watch out for when they're thinking around AI and maybe implement it in their jobs or workflows, what have you? What are some of those risks and pitfalls that you've seen?
So I think the biggest one obviously is the use of data.
Mm,
Quite simply, how
mm-hmm,
where are we getting the data from? How are we using it? Um, do we have the permissions? Do we have the rights? Are we
mm-hmm.
using it responsibly? Are we storing it responsibly? Um, and
Yeah.
I think that's an emerging question. In fact, one of the things that we talked about in the panel that we have, and David is part of the expert panel, and we're going to talk more about that in due course.
Mm-hmm,
But one of the things that came up, was an idea that, just like we did with sustainable procurement process, that you need to have some kind of validation that, hey, this was secure at a fair price, and for example, a product, a coffee shipped from somewhere, the farmers were treated right, there were no pesticides used,
yeah.
there was fair pricing and all of that. So there were some suggestions or expectations from larger companies that maybe there is some kind of a validation process that needs to happen.
Mm,
And how do companies build AI models, right? Are they building it responsibly or not?
mm,
So I think that's the one part that I think any end user has to be thinking about and is already thinking about, and people who are actually building models need to think about as well, that eventually this is going to come, and this is right now around the corner.
right.
And I think, to me, that becomes critical in understanding. The second part is, this, because it's so easy to use it now and it's so accessible, anybody and everybody in an organization think that they can use an AI tool without really understanding what could potentially be the exposure, right? Especially
Mm,
around customer data or personnel data that they
mm-hmm,
may be exposing to third parties, right?
yep.
Verified. So I think that's really where I believe that there is some caution
Mm-hmm,
that needs to coming through, and there would be some process and regulation that I do see coming through, which is good for
right.
us, I must
Yeah,
say, because
it's true.
companies like Question Pro, where we do spend that effort and time to actually do those things right, will
Mm-hmm.
will be differentiated.
No, yeah, I 100% agree. David, what about you? Pitfalls, risks that
Yeah.
you see or that people should watch out for?
Yeah, I'd say along the same lines, from a data and privacy perspective, transparency in collecting the data
Mm,
is super important as well. Just how it's going to get leveraged. I think folks are happy to share information. We've learned this over the course of at least my career. Like, if you're open and honest as to like how you intend on using it, people are
mhm,
very, very forthcoming. Um, I think beyond that, it becomes part of it is kind of like actually like infringement on like a personal brand, right? Like, if you start
mm,
thinking about a generative AI process, you see this in film and audio. There's the reason why there's a writer's strike right now and everything else, right?
yeah.
It's if I could build a responsive AI that can mimic the voice of my customer, shall I build that instead of going out and speak? There's a lot of those kinds of things that we're going to have to really have good conversations about in the near future. And then, even if you have kind of historical data, how that then trains the rest of the model in and of itself.
Right.
Because I think this kind of like black box mentality of where you just sort of enter into this kind of into the space and what exactly goes into the training of the model is kind of anybody's guess in some cases. In some cases, there's more transparency. So I think there's got to be some standardization of transparency there, so that we can all execute those whatever we're kind of working on with a greater amount of trust and really kind of just understanding that what we're seeing is real. It's not a hallucination. There's a less likelihood to be a hallucination because the data sources are valid and clean. So there's quite a bit there to sort of figure out. And I think to Sumair's point earlier, everybody's kind of running right now to get into the space. And so I think that's why I think it's important to have conversations like this, like I said, and joining the sort of the group that Sumair's leading as well. It's just because those topics, they really do need to be front and center.
Yeah, no, I would agree, and I like what you said.
Sorry, I just want to present a flip side to that as well, right? So yes, as we think about the risks and the pitfalls, and they're always there, but we also need to obviously mention that there is a way in which we can potentially address some of that. Is that if we broaden the kind of the stakeholders who are part of this ecosystem, right? So I think one big stakeholder that usually misses out is the consumer, right? And it's really their data. So if and again, the reason why I sold my company to Question Pro, which is an AI company, and I'm part of QP as well, is because I think these kind of ecosystems provide a trusted platform where there is data with consent available, and I think we need to kind of broaden even organizations who are who are building and using customer data. I think they need to broaden the stakeholder and bring consumers into the conversation as well, so that they feel that they are part of the equation and that they're going to get something at the end of it. So I think those mediums, those channels need to be created because they don't exist right now.
No, it's interesting. I mean, you certainly don't want to leave the consumers out of the equation, right? That's why we're doing these insights. So if you leave them out, like, what are you really gaining? One thing I really like what you guys, I think both of you said it, is you need to cite like, hey, AI was used in this, or generative AI was used in these, what do you want to call them, predictions, insights, whatever it might be. I think one thing that's interesting to me is like, well, like, what if AI gets it wrong? Or what if these aren't accurate? I'm like, but then people don't always get it right too, right? It's this weird thing that we have where we expect AI or these models to be correct 100% of the time, even when we aren't. So it's weird that we hold these to a higher standard. So I don't know if you guys have any thoughts there, but it was just kind of something that I was thinking about as you guys were, kind of conversing over the pitfalls. I think there's also sort of this inverse pitfall of maybe not adopting AI because you think it's going to be wrong or incorrect, when people are in fact, they're not 100% right either. So I don't know if you guys have any comments on that or the thoughts around that.
I think I can chime in. I think from my perspective, one of the benefits of AI is efficiency. And part of the efficiency is in the timing that it takes to get to the insight. And then, I forget who mentioned it before, but I think that's part of all of our jobs, right? Like, everything has to be faster, everything has to be, right at our fingertips. And so if you lose some of that kind of expediency, and because you start sort of lacking the trust because maybe there's some mistakes, you're right, it's going to make mistakes. It's part of every process. But I think there's going to be an ebb and flow there. And I think, to your point, maybe that's just another interesting thing to really start thinking about, is those controls in place. Like, when we see reports, sometimes we'll check tabs and cross-check data and be able to sort of like dig in even deeper to see if there's any uncovered insights that weren't uncovered, and things like that. So I think there's probably some approach that can be put in place, or a control, let's say, to make sure that you're not getting a hallucination. You're getting a real response from that's accurate as well.
Right.
Yeah, I think so. There are two companies that I heard of that they came about. One was saying that they're going to use AI to predict what newborn babies are actually saying because nobody understands them, but they have figured out a way to translate that into simple English.
Interesting. Huh.
The other one was, we can tell you what your dog is feeling right now.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Now, if you're gonna buy into those, well, you're putting yourself into something that you don't even know. No, there's no way to verify it. There is no way to validate whether that's true or not. So I think there will always be those cases, but I think where the demand now is from AI solutions is that they need to follow through to an outcome, right? So it's not good enough to just say, hey, here is the insight, take it, and that's it, right? Be done with it. I think there are more and more calls and demands to say, okay, how does it really affect the whatever it is that I'm trying to achieve? So whatever ecosystem that are being built, they need to be, solutions need to be built, need to have a very clear line of sight towards results and outcomes. And I think again, I keep saying that, but maybe because I'm just too excited about it, is that the couple of things that we are working on, like the QX bot that you auto generation of surveys and or insights hub, where we say you can basically ask any question of your research, actually is very clear way to validate the results and the ROI of it. So I think more and more companies need to think from those perspectives when they create or start to adopt AI solutions.
Got it. No, that makes sense. And I think you mentioned like understanding babies and dogs. I think it just goes to like humans want to understand things, right? And if we can't understand something, we want to try to figure out a way how and kind of the process behind it. So I think it's anchored in that. At least that's my feeling. And David, I think I know your answer to this, but is AI like going to reduce people? Is there an opportunity for creating new jobs? Should be taken as such? Like, what are your thoughts there? I know you mentioned earlier it's like the best assistant you could have, so maybe that's part of it. But what are your thoughts around AI and jobs?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's there was a research study I think done recently amongst researchers and asking them that very question, and it seemed like the majority of researchers were kind of erring on the side of it's a good thing because of what it can do for my job. But there is kind of this a little bit more of a murkiness in terms of what whether or not it's going to be impacting roles specifically. It's probably too early to tell at this point, but I would say if we're kind of developing this software, what's likely, I've heard this from some marketing partners as well, and they've kind of developed like the way that they're speaking to, especially when you talk about creative and things like that, is that creative folks or folks within those roles specifically who are really adept at building the right query and then are able to embed AI into their workflow are going to be the ones that are more likely to succeed versus those who are reluctant to embed it into their workflow and may get left behind. So I think that's kind of the distinction here. It's just as all the different technologies that have come up within the market research space over the course of our, the long storied history of what we do. All these technologies are kind of disruptive in nature to a certain degree. As long as you become sort of really embedded into it, I think that's why it's really important to sort of stay informed. This should theoretically become a facilitator for us. Certain things easier, certain tasks easier, which is only going to simplify things. And I think one thing that probably won't change is the demand of insights and how much people want quicker insights and so I think this will just help facilitate that process. So maybe I'm a general optimist by nature, but I think my perspective is more geared towards thinking that it's an opportunity for us. And again, I think it's really just important to start dipping your toe in the water and getting really comfortable and start setting some queries and be okay with making some mistakes and kind of learning your way through it. Because it's a fascinating sort of world to live in, and a tool to sort of to use specifically just to help kind of execute on all this new work.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, and I like what you said, and that'll actually increase the demand for insights. I agree with you there. Sumair, what are your thoughts on this whole topic of, is AI going to take my job and so forth?
Yeah, maybe that's why David and I get together so well, because I am also an optimist. I believe that AI and all this innovation is going to be a great equalizer. It's going to take it is already taking the capabilities from very few select experts and all of that into the hands of everybody pretty much, right? We all can do something about it. We can all aim for something around this. So I think it's a great equalizer, and I think overall is definitely going to increase opportunities for everybody. Unlearning and relearning is going to be the theme for the foreseeable future, right? We all know that. That's something that's been talked about since a while right now, right? So in fact, all our kids are now being taught in schools how to unlearn and relearn, right? And I think this is just, if you're open to doing that, I do believe that this is going to actually improve our abilities, increase the kind of jobs that would be available, and the kind of outcomes that we would be able to create as a result of it. So I do believe that we don't have to see it as something that, I mean, surely in the short term there might be some productivity related shifts that might happen, but I'm sure it's going to create a lot of new opportunities.
Yeah, no, I think we're all optimists here for sure on that front. We had an interesting question come in from Brian Beal here. He said, if you think of generative AI as a 100-step journey, what step do you think we're currently on, compared to its full potential? Kind of interesting way to think about it. So, do you guys have an answer to this? I know I kind of put you on the spot here, but thought it was an interesting question nonetheless.
I mean, David, you want to go first?
No, you go ahead. Go ahead, Sumair.
Yeah, that's an easy one to take, right? No, in my view, I think we are just at the infancy stage, to be honest. I think we're just learning to figure ourselves out what it really is and what the possibilities are. There is a whole lot more that is going to come.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think, like, when you think about product inception, and obviously there's a huge adoption, you see that adoption is kind of waned a little bit with GPT, right? So we're entering kind of into that second phase. If you just GPT as a proxy for all of this, from a consumer's lens.
Yep.
Partially because there's a theory that school let out, and so there's a lot less people using it because a lot of people were using it for school, which is a whole other issue.
That's interesting.
The other part of it is the fact that there's there's a novelty to it, and I think there's kind of, now it's like, well, what can it do for me? And I think so now we're migrating from novelty phase over now into more practitioner phase, where we're really starting to implement and embed, and then there's going to be some errors made that we'll have to figure out kind of how to course correct, and then all the while kind of really making sure that we're asking some of the questions that we asked earlier, right, in terms of privacy, transparency, and things like that. So as long as we kind of build in that responsible fashion, then the next phases of that journey could become more productive.
Got it. That makes sense. I agree. And so we're probably on, if it's 100 steps, we're probably on step 5 or something, maybe, right? So pretty low compared to where it can go. Interesting. So and there's an interesting point, because I think we had talked about it earlier, in that, hey, a lot of people just don't know about AI. They think they know, they're jumping into it, they want to know more. What are some good resources that you guys have seen that, like, maybe you could steer people to, in terms of, hey, I want to know more about it, I want to learn more about it? Anything come to mind?
I think off the top of my head, like, there's a lot of profiles within LinkedIn where they'll start posting some really amazing, like, just prompts to test.
Yeah.
And then I think, and kind of use cases, right? Because I think ultimately there's this, like, big shiny tool that's been kind of put in front of all of us, and depending on what you're doing that day or that month or whatever, it hasn't been that long period of time since it's been kind of available to all of us. Folks are getting really creative with it and finding really interesting ways of using it through those prompts. And so I think like there's a myriad of different sources, but if you even just search for AI and GPT and things like that, there's toolkits, and just as long as you find a trusted source, they're really great ways to prompt. But I think ultimately it's just about getting in there, and you don't have to subscribe to GPT. You can use 3.5. It's good enough to sort of learn how to be dangerous with it. But like you won't be an expert necessarily. But then ultimately, it sort of gets your your feet wet and really starting to dig into it. But I think that's really a good place to start.
Interesting. Yeah, I agree with that. Sumair, anything resources or anything come to mind?
Ask ChatGPT, man.
There you go. That's a perfect spot to wrap it up. So ask ChatGPT. I love it. All right. Well, hey, David, Sumair, thanks so much for joining me today. I think a really great conversation, and more to come. We'll definitely have you guys back on probably maybe 6 months and see. Maybe we'll be on step 20 by then. You never know. So awesome. Yeah. Thanks so much for joining.
Thanks, Dan, for having us.
Thanks.